this meeting of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency to order. And Mr. Zaragoza, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
Please follow me. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could we have the roll call, please?
Director Zaragoza?
Here.
Vice Chair Craven?
Here.
Director Kelly?
Here.
Director Borchert?
Here.
Could we have the agenda review, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We have a few changes we want to point out to you. One, we've distributed for the minutes proposed change and a substitution. We got some comments from Callejas, and we think this will meet the intent of the comments that Henry provided to us. So we propose that be substituted in the minutes under public comment. We have a substitution on the graphic. This is item 4A, page 6 of 8. The shading was missing in the table, so you now have a complete graphic. We also have for the quarterly water supply project update some material for you to look at in conjunction with that presentation. I also want to call out that on the resolutions in items 7 and 8, they have the chair and vice chair. The signatures are different. We resolve that usually with whoever the chair is. As you know, Board Member Craven, you are the chair today, so we'll correct that when those items, if they are adopted by you.
Okay.
And
So we solved the problem by not adopting it.
that's one way of solving it. And then lastly, in item 7A, the resolution, it should say payment is due 2009 versus 2010. Those are all the changes.
Okay. Thank you. This is a time for public comments. We will ask for, if there's any members of the public who have comments to this board about items that are not on the agenda.
Hello, Henry Gromlich, Callejas Municipal Water District. I just have a question on a point of order on the agenda review. Do you need to approve by a majority of vote the the revisions that were proposed for the agenda?
I believe we'll get to that when we get to the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Cheryl Collard, the Executive Director of the Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance. I'd like to speak to you just for a moment during your public comment period. First of all, I am a bit remiss in thanking you for celebrating our 5 years of activity last year, and part of my reason in coming to your group this year is to help bridge some of the coordination and collaboration between the Regional Energy Alliance Office and the work of the water agencies and organizations like this. It is indeed a huge opportunity that we're facing in terms of coordination, collaboration, and leveraging all of our various resources, and I wanted to simply speak to you today to let you know that we have had some good successes with the members of your staff and through this organization. Last August, we were very successful in doing a water pump testing training program. We had about 45 participants that have continued to work with us on energy issues, which of course ultimately will benefit water as well. This coming fall season, we are also now trying to work towards a joint training that would include water, energy, and greenhouse gas accounting, which again is something that we all have to be working on together. I also know that you are busy working on a newsletter that's part of your bigger planning efforts. I'd like to leave with you our newsletter to again just sort of bridge the relationship here and make this available to you so you know what we're doing and how we also try to support the work of water agencies with again some of the water energy connections and training. I would also like to report that I continue to work with the Watershed Council when it's possible There are numerous things that, again, that go on between water energy connections, and we are involved in that. We're also actively looking at some of the energy stimulus funds that are coming forward. A lot of these are for energy efficiencies, but there's great connection to the water efficiencies as well. So we're looking out on behalf of that. It's a pleasure to work with your staff. I'm acquainted with several of them and appreciate the time that they've given to making the Regional Energy Alliance a success. We just had our board meeting last week, so again, we've come into our 6th year, and we're working with public agencies across the county to, our first point of effort is energy efficiency, but ultimately we are looking for reliable energy resources, leveraging resources, and making sure that we have enough supply of energy, and that includes, of course, again, the water energy connection. So again, just my pleasure to be before you today, and again, thank you for your support. Express my concern. I was a bit remiss in not bringing regards back from my board as well last year, but we just meet 4 times a year. Many of you are acquainted with some of our board members. You know our work that we undertake. So thank you so much, and to the staff, I appreciate the opportunity to continue to work with you and look forward to getting a great training together in the fall this year. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay.
I have one question. So how many stimulus dollars do you think you're going to get? You mentioned that.
As you know, just quickly, we are a joint powers public agency, and many of the stimulus dollars are not set up for JPAs to be the recipients. But as a regional energy office, the whole focus and purpose and the reason we formed as a region is to leverage the resources. So we are working regularly with the 6 cities who were able to receive by formula energy efficiency funds. We just had a meeting yesterday with the 4 small cities in the county who were not part of that original big push to see what we can do to identify projects, and we continue to work with any other piece of energy that comes around. So I think
working in a joint effort with the
a lot of joint efforts. So there's all sorts of things from I'll say in the 6 figures to probably beyond that, as certainly some of the larger cities have received up to $1 million that is proposed for the program, for whatever their proposals are. So we hope they are able to do that, and we're doing what we can to support their efforts.
And thank you for the partnership.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the board on an item that is not on the agenda? Please state your name for the record.
Madam Chair and members of the board, my name is Craig Underwood from Zone Mutual Water Company, and there are a couple of things I would like to bring up to you. There's certainly a lot of interest and anxiety as you move forward and talk about limits on pumping, moratoriums on wells. For example, today at our Las Posas Basin Users Group, we had 22 or 23 participants when normally we might have 8 to 10. Yesterday, our pumpers group, who is represented by Mr. Kelly, met and discussed some of the issues. Number one, budget, which is on your agenda, but I had other issues I wanted to talk about. There's concern that the budget is increasing by almost $500,000 in 1 year, and it's being supported by penalties, which a number of us feel is an unsustainable way to support an increase in the budget. Now, when we make an expense budget on the ranch, we always try and beat that budget, so I would hope if you do pass the budget in its current form that you make every effort to try and beat that budget and keep those expenses down, and make sure that every project that is targeted is beneficial in increasing either our water supply or bringing us closer to sustainable yield. I know through the SAG and the TAG meetings, there's been a lot of feedback that there's a strong feeling that a good way to spend penalty money is to try and either do some sort of infrastructure project or some sort of a long-term, maybe cost-sharing project that could help bring more water into the county, because into specific basins in particular, because if we have to squeeze back to limits on water based on what we currently understand as sustainable yield, that's going to have a huge impact on agriculture. Also, we would like to, and I'm not speaking for the pumpers, but I think I'm fairly representing some of the discussions that we had yesterday. Unirrigated land. As we're talking about ceiling on pumping, we're very concerned about well permits that are allowing more land to be irrigated, because ultimately that is going to decrease the amount that all of us have to share. So I think, not only is there an equity issue, but there's a legal issue that the GMA needs to explore. When it comes to deciding some of these things, it might not be a bad idea if the GMA considered independent counsel at different times, not because you're not represented well by county council, but at times there are conflicts of interest, and at other times it might be valuable to seek advice from an attorney who's well-schooled in water law. And I guess finally, I would like to encourage the GMA to not only view your role as regulatory, but as a clearinghouse encouraging different projects to bring more water in, because there are resources out there that if we manage them correctly and put in the infrastructure, that maybe we can help solve some of these issues without draconian cutbacks in water. We certainly don't want to end up like the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. So, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. We can't really discuss this, but we will discuss the budget when the item comes up on the agenda. The other items, I'd just like to briefly say that we are looking at ways of not necessarily bringing more water in, but reusing some of the water that's already here. And I think that that might deal with some of the other things that you brought up. And I'm trying to get all this in without the attorney telling me I can't say anymore. Are there any other public comments on items not on the agenda? Please state your name for the record.
My name is Sam McIntyre. I'm Burwood Mutual Water Company. I just want to reinstate what Mr. Underwood said, because my looking at the budget almost doubling, and
Would you like to make your budget comments when it comes up for discussion?
I don't have any direct
Oh,
comments
okay.
to the budget,
Okay.
but when Lynn was sitting in your chair for many, many years, he's needled me about wanting to keep the cost down, and every time the board would raise it $2, we'd fight like heck to get it back down. It has always been my thought, and I think the direction of all the farmers, that the GMA was to be kept as a small entity. It wasn't to grow into a huge entity with many employees, that we were to be directed basically with ag water. And as Mr. Underwood stated, the intent to this time, and I've been to the CAG and the TAG meetings, was to take the penalties and develop water either through reverse osmosis wells and or working with the cities and everything else. It was not to go to build an entity such the size that the GMA is now becoming. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to make comments, public comments to the board not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we'll move on to board member comments. No board member comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
And I don't see Mr. Pratt here today, but maybe Gerhardt might be able to answer the question. Last meeting I requested if we could get going on having some of the outside legal help start to look at some of our ordinances and our legislation and some of our resolutions. Has any effort been done on that?
I believe in the past, we've actually had a line item to accomplish that. I'd have to double check the budget today. Gerard?
Well, if I could comment, in response to the question at the last meeting, the proposal was that as needed and as directed by the board, we would draw from contingency to do that. So the critical message is, should you desire a specific item to be reviewed by outside counsel, we would request direction to staff, and then we would come back and say, okay, here's how you're going to fund it out of contingency. That was the response at that point in time.
I remember making that response in the budget discussion. Maybe I wasn't clear, and maybe I don't remember quite right, but if I could ask the rest of the board that maybe we could instruct staff that I do think it's time that we engage our water lawyers of SOMAC and SOMAC to do a thorough review of our legislation and our ordinance and our resolutions, and then come to there are some issues that are preventing us from regulating and enforcing our rules properly.
I think maybe the next step here, or maybe what we need to do today, since it's about all we could do today, is to ask that an item be placed on the next agenda so that we can, and have it a general topic of, you can state the topic as you would like it on the next agenda, but then we can make the direction to staff that we can't today since it's not on the agenda. But we have to have the agenda item first, so could we have this item, as Mr. Borchard states it, on the next agenda, please? And you state it.
I'm willing to do that, but I thought we were able to give staff instructions about things we wanted them to do. Is that not true?
Well, I don't know. Let's ask the attorney, but I think if we're talking about spending money to have some attorneys looking at something
I see what you're
specific, we
saying.
need
Okay.
specific agenda items so we can give real direction to spend that money. Is that correct?
That is correct. The GMA does have an existing agreement with SOMAC, which your board authorized, I believe, in '07, but the board may need to modify that agreement to increase the scope, which it sounds like Director Borchard is interested in doing. So in that sense, it would need to come back for a specific action by your board.
And if I might, it's not dissimilar from the concept of a annual contract, which we have to retain them, but then developing work task order scopes to give them specific guidance. The problem with an open-ended request is neither they nor we are set up against a performance metric. And so to the extent that your board can be specific about what you want reviewed, whether all ordinances, a ordinance, what issues, I think that's helpful, and then we can craft the scope in response to that and execute it at your direction. So the capacity is there, the underlying ability to use them is there, has been there for some time. It's just a question of for what do you want to use them, and then the more the scope is defined, I think the better it will be.
Perhaps I should meet with staff, clarify this, give a real specific agenda item that we can get on the next meeting, which I guess is in September, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
That's fine, and I think that would be good, but in the meantime, let's get into the minutes that there has been a request by a board member to have an agenda item on this topic at the next meeting. Any other board member comments? Okay. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes, and please note that there was a request by Mr. Gromlich to amend the words under public comments that he made. What are the wishes of the board? Motion to approve the minutes as amended.
I would have to abstain from this one then.
Don't we have to extend the opportunity for them to correct them before we can approve them?
Well, we have a correction here.
Subject to that, to the correction.
So I guess the motion would be to approve the minutes as amended here.
Okay, we'll second that motion.
Okay,
And I'll abstain. Sure, it goes.
Mr. Zaragoza is telling us he's going to abstain. Do we have a motion?
I move we approve the minutes as amended.
Okay, second?
I will second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And abstain.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries with Mr. Zaragoza abstaining. Item number 2, semi-annual public outreach initial newsletter target date change. Could we have the staff report, please? You just thought we'd discuss the minutes a little more, didn't you?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, Gerard Kakusik with the Watershed Protection District and agency staff. The item is a perfunctory change of date for the target initial date of the or initial newsletter to the to the January meeting. We felt that it would be better to start in the new year, and in light of some of the comments in terms of collaboration issues with BCREA and others, we might be able to do a better job. So it's really nothing more than that. We're just bringing that to your attention so that you understood that we were proposing a change in the target date.
Okay, is there a motion to receive and file the report?
So moved.
Motion second to receive and file. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Item 4, Las Posas Basin specific groundwater management plan status. Could we have that staff report, please?
How about 3?
Oh, item 3, yes.
If you'd
I thought
like,
that
I
was
can
going
do
to
item-
take a little more time, and I just get rid of it. I'm sorry. I apologize. Item 3, work plan update.
Madam Chair, board members, Gerhard Huebner, Watershed Protection District. I have a brief report on our work plan update. Under Task 1, the Irrigation Efficiency Program, we did carry forth the recommendations from the board from the last meeting, drafting 83 letters, or sending out 83 letters. The letters were actually, we drafted the letters. We have not yet sent them out. They're going to go out at the end of this month, my correction here. We've also corrected our database. We've zeroed out the prior surcharges prior to 2005. For this year's IE filings, we found that 67 of the 108 submitted lacked required information, contained errors. Moving on to task number 3, a group of 71 certified return receipt letters were sent to the suspected unregistered well owners. We are now down to 25 non-compliant, so that's some good news. Of the 71 down to 25. And then under task 4, meter calibration, the deadline is passed now. We're down to 23 wells out of compliance. We're planning to follow up with 14 of those, and there remains 9 of them where either they returned undeliverable or we need to do further research on the addresses. Under task number 7, I just want to there needs to be a correction. There is a SAG meeting that will be tomorrow, July 23rd, not June 25th. That's the prior meeting. That's my report today. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay, motion to receive and file? How about making the motion?
Did you make the motion?
No. I'm asking if there is a motion. Okay?
Second.
Second. Motion and a second to receive and file the report. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Now, Las Posas Basin specific groundwater management plan status.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Craven and the directors and the audience. For the record, Brian Bondi with United Water and Fox Canyon GMA, and I'm presenting a staff report on item 4, an update on the Las Posas Basin specific management plan status. Real quickly, for the benefit of alternate Director Zaragoza, what's going on with this item is that Cayugas Municipal Water District and the Las Posas Users Group have engaged to develop a basin-specific management plan, and the purpose of these monthly updates is just simply to keep the board up to date on the pace and progress of the plan development.
Thank you.
Update on the user group meetings. There were user group meetings in both June and July. The July meeting was this morning. Quickly going through the items from the June meeting, there is an agenda package. There's a complete set of minutes in your agenda package. That's item 4A. There's also the monthly update on the meeting attendance statistics, item 4B. And just real quickly, overall, the attendance statistics are pretty much similar to prior months. We see a little up and down based on the exact members attending. In June, the users group discussed a table of contents for the basin-specific plan. You heard a little bit about this last month in my update. The group basically has accepted that for the time being as submitted by Cayugas. Some comments were received and incorporated outside of the users group, including comments from myself and Dr. Bachman.
The group also discussed a listing of schedule and milestone items for the plan development. And that was also prepared by Cayugas. And the schedule can be found in item 4A in your agenda. There are four main broad groupings of tasks shown in that schedule. First is stakeholder involvement and review. Second is administrative support. Third is technical evaluation, and the fourth is strategic evaluation. And I'll just run through each of those real quick. The tasks listed under the stakeholder involvement and review grouping basically encompass the overall stakeholder process and GMA review process for the basin plan, basin-specific plan. The administrative support tasks basically map to the background sections of the basin plan, and those will be largely compiled from existing sources of information. The technical evaluation tasks map to those sections of the plan that will essentially provide the technical underpinning for the management strategies that are recommended in the plan. And that folds right into the strategic evaluation group of tasks, which map directly to the latter portion of the basin plan, where the stakeholder group will develop recommendations for addressing groundwater management concerns. Also during the June meeting, several pumpers asked questions about how the basin-specific plan will be folded into the existing GMA groundwater management plan and the ordinance. And that's a very good topic for discussion, something we should get out in front of so that when the plan is approved, there's a mechanism to incorporate it within the GMA. So staff is bringing those questions as a topic for SAG discussion. This morning's user group meeting, there were two items discussed that are relevant to the basin plan. First, Cayugas presented a list of topics for the technical evaluation and strategic evaluation portions of the schedule that we just talked about. And this was basically just a list. The group discussed the list. There were no items added at this time, and the idea is that we'll come back in future meetings and hit each topic in detail. The results of those discussions will then be folded into the basin plan. The second item of note was that we also held an introductory discussion on the groundwater basin boundaries, the three basins, the west, east, and south Las Posas basins. Obviously those boundaries will be a key element of the plan because they'll be used to define management areas where different management strategies may or may not be applied differently. The group will continue to discuss how best to define those boundaries at future meetings. The meeting minutes from this morning's user group meeting will be provided to you in the September agenda package. Task updates. Normally I provide an update on other tasks related to the basin-specific plan, but I've pretty much covered those tasks in the preceding discussion, so no further updates in that area. And that concludes this update.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to receive and file?
Motion made.
Second?
Second.
Motion is second to receive and file the report. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Quarterly water supply projects update.
Afternoon again. For the record, Brian Bondi, United Water, and Fox Canyon GMA. Item 5 is a new item, and this is going to consist of a quarterly update on water supply projects. As you're aware, water supply projects are going to be a vital component in reaching safe yield in the time to come. And I'd like to remind everyone that even though the GMA is not authorized to build and operate water supply projects, there are various mechanisms by which the GMA can support projects, and we've heard some discussion during public comment about that. We can financially provide financial resources to these projects, letter support, resolutions supporting projects, and allow for policy modifications that help enable and make projects possible. So the goal of this update and future updates is to ensure that we're all aware of the status of those projects so we can stay out ahead and proactively react to those projects and support those that support the agency's mission. Today's report will be an initial overview prepared by Dr. Steve Bachman, and basically he'll summarize existing and proposed projects in their current state. If your board feels that these updates are valuable use of time, we propose to bring them quarterly, and future updates will most likely focus on specific projects. Steve wants to come up.
Okay, and there is a handout on the desk.
Yeah, I was just going to go over that.
He'll be
You should have a
talking to-
handout. It's essentially a table that summarizes existing and proposed projects. Brief synopsis of each project, a discussion of the primary benefits, some information about expected completion timing and costs for projects that are in the future. And also the last column ties these projects to where they're referenced in the groundwater management plan and other agency documents. So, with no further ado, Steve.
Gee, you were doing well, Brian. I could have just sat down. Brian and I put this set of sheets together here, and probably everybody who has a particular project will have some complaint about it. So it hasn't been reviewed outside of that. But we wanted to kind of get something out there. And we thought it was important because the GMA has a tendency to be reactive to many of these projects. Projects are well planned by the time they get to the GMA, and the GMA usually has to decide on some issues, usually about transferring credits or something, some other kind of issue related to that. We thought when we had a meeting with GMA staff, we thought it was, and then Mulhart, we thought it was a good idea to kind of turn this the other way around a little bit so you know which issues are going to be coming towards the GMA and potentially what you can help on it. And of course, there's ultimately the question that has been coming up about whether the GMA would actually provide some monetary support for this as well. So let me just go through some of these. It's going to be brief. We're going to have patches all over that map before we're done. This is the map of. I get the wrong thing. That's okay. I took it off. The map is of the Oxnard Plain, Pleasant Valley area. You can see seawater intrusion here. Some of these projects are related, are using current facilities, and so the facilities you see are spreading basins up here in the forebay, the Oxnard-Huanimi potable pipeline here, the pumping trough pipeline, which is an irrigation use, as well as the Pleasant Valley County Water District's pipeline. And so having a lot of this existing infrastructure here is certainly a big help. We know that the Las Posas Basin Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project, which is up in the Las Posas Basin up here, has been operational. As a matter of fact, there's water being pumped out of it right now because of the drought issues. And right now, there aren't any particular issues related for GMA. As the Conejo Creek Project, which is a diversion here on water supplied to Pleasant Valley, at this point, all the GMA issues have been resolved on that. So let me move forward to one of the projects, and this is the Freeman Diversion. Obviously, the Freeman Diversion has been in place for a while. And of course, that's where a lot of the fish issues are. We're trying to protect as much of the water supply as we can right now. There are plans, however, to increase diversions on the Freeman Diversion in the future, and that's in two ways. One, off of flood flows. Right now, the very high peaks are so silty that they plug up the ponds, and some of the projects with some of the new basins potentially would bypass the normal ponds and be able to put this peak of water, and that's quite a bit of water flows during these peaks. There's also going to be a long-term thing that United Water is going to be working on of potentially getting a larger water right for diversion at high flows, so you miss the fish issues as well. That's going to be something going in front of the state board, and we think that's probably a 10-year process, and until these fish issues are by, we probably aren't going to start that process yet. The next project that's sitting out there right now, and there's been considerable discussion here, is called Water Tap. TAP is for Transfer Across the Plain, and it's an expansion of the Conejo Creek project where water is diverted off of Conejo Creek, supplied to Pleasant Valley County Water District. This would be a longer-term, potentially a longer-term use of that water, and have some additional water, the full 9,000 acre feet that's in that could be diverted on the Conejo Creek project. Right now, the hanging up point on this is not GMA policy, because it really follows current policy that was set by the Conejo Creek project, but it's cost, particularly the cost for agriculture at this point. And
appears as though there may have to be some subsidy by someone somehow on this project to get it going. So the potential yield is an extra 3,000 acre feet on the short term and maybe as much as the full amount of 9,000 acre feet over the long term. So that one's in great discussion right now and has been probably for the last 6 months or so. The great project, I don't have to say too much about that from the City of Oxnard's project, except that steps are moving forward. You may have heard they got stimulus money for that. And so what's being looked at right now is this first phase of delivery. And the great project, of course, treating recycled water in this area. There are lots of options of where that water could go. Some of it can go directly to agriculture, potentially coming in on the lower parts of these pipelines. Some of it, of course, can go for municipal use, which is going to happen for sure. The other possibility is injection in this area. One of the problems, of course, when you're relying on agricultural deliveries is the demand from agriculture is quite different in the winter than it is in the summer. So, and the wastewater stream is pretty constant. So you have to have something to do with that in off-season. The other possibility would be take it up pipelines. There's a pipeline that's being lined here by the City of Oxnard, and potentially you could take it up for recharge in the forebay. The issues that are going to come up on this are going to be, there are going to be some credit transfers because the City of Oxnard, when anybody's using that water, they would expect to get some credits for that water, kind of like the Conejo Creek project works, and then pump it back in the region of the forebay. So we have one of these transfer programs as well. And depending how it works, with all those different possibilities, each kind of credit transfer would work a little differently. So you're going to see that fairly soon. The technical work for this first phase is going to begin fairly shortly here for the specific engineering planning on that project.
Excuse me, Steve. What's the Obama money going to be used for?
It's, as far as I know, that most of that money is going into the RO plant itself, so for construction. And the thing that's moving things ahead is that to be able to satisfy some of the requirements for that money, they have to be on production in 2-3 years, something like that. So it means they got to get going right away because these were supposedly shovel-ready projects. You know,
Madam Chair, they have a timeline for that to spend that money too.
Right.
Which I think is extremely important, and it's I think Ken Ortega was sharing that they have to work probably 24/7 to get that done.
Yeah, it's going to happen really fast. Yeah. So it's been slowly working its way through the system, and now all of a sudden it's going to be there. So at least the first phase of it.
Madam Chair, can I ask the doctor a quick question? Yes. The GREAT program, is that going to push that salt water back? Is that probably one of the
well, we sure hope so.
One of the intents of that too.
Well, that can be done different ways. For instance, if it's supplying agriculture in this area, that would water be used instead of pumping. So, of course, by taking the pumping stress off of here, you're taking some of the cause of pulling that seawater in.
At least stopping it then.
That's right. And an injection would be the same kind of thing as well. The only one that wouldn't be was if the water goes back up there into recharge ponds and it's just pumped right back out by the City of Oxnard, then the aquifer is not particularly seeing a benefit. So we're certainly pushing hard for having parts of the project out here where it directly benefits the aquifer.
And the wetlands, it's going to help the wetlands too there.
Yep, yeah. It's a good project.
One more question, Steve.
Sure.
What is the project short in terms of making it really a go? I mean, are you short pipelines that need to be built, or?
Pipelines have to be aligned. There have to be, if there's a barrier project, a piece to it, an injection well, which I'm actually going to talk about in just a minute, that needs to be constructed. Depending if there was water being, I keep thinking this is the other one, so we're getting ahead of ourselves. If something had to go up here to these ponds, there'd be some pipeline construction then as well. So, yeah, I think back there.
But the Ventura Road, Madam Chair, the Ventura Road line is an existing line.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They're just lining it. But there is
Ventura Road line.
Yeah.
And that line is going to go up to the spreading ponds? The Ventura Road line?
Up towards River Park.
River
It's
Park.
close enough that it could be, you'd have to put an extension on, but it would
Close to the
be.
golf course.
It's going to be sent into recharge, put into a pond of some sort.
It could go into a pond.
Oh, no decision yet.
No, that's one of the options being looked at in this final design piece of that.
Thank you.
The final build-out, this first one is like 5,000 or 6,000 acre-feet of water. The final one, phase 2, which is maybe a decade away or so, could be as much as 20 or 25,000 acre-feet of water. And when you look at that relative to what the difference is between the safe yield and what we're pumping right now, that's really close to making up a large part of that gap. So clearly, if this water is used in the right place, it's going to be a big part of the solution here. Another project is the salinity, the regional salinity management pipeline and different facilities being headed up by Callegas. As you probably know, they're building a brine line, or have built parts of the brine line that would come all the way up along Callegas Creek, go into at least Moore Park, and maybe all the way to Simi Valley. The outfall to that is being worked on now. So, and that project is aimed at this thing that the GMA is definitely going to have to deal with, and that is that a lot of the water that's proposed to be pumped and treated and put into the brine, put into the salinity management pipeline, is water that's in these shallow aquifers. The city of Camarillo was the first shot at that, and there's certainly going to be some more right after that, particularly up in Las Posas. So that's going to be something that's going to be a little different that the GMA is going to have to deal with. The one that perhaps doesn't have as much GMA overlap is the alternative water resource management. That's the one with the chlorides in Santa Clarita. And there's going to be more yield, more water in the river, more yield for the Freeman diversion. And the only thing that would potentially do is with more pipeline deliveries out here, there would be more credits accumulating, but it wouldn't be any kind of change of policy. I don't know if you've heard, but it's kind of controversial up there in Santa Clarita right now, because there were going to be there were proposed big rate hikes for sewage, and of course they've been a lot lower than what we've been paying in Ventura County, so we didn't have a lot of sympathy. But when the rubber met the road on passing some of these things, the sanitation district, the local sanitation district, which is just one piece of the larger LA County sanitation districts, said they weren't ready for it. It fund 1 year, but they're not ready to go past that point. And there have just been, the newspapers up there have just been screaming about all the advantages that Ventura County's getting off of this, and we, the poor ratepayers, are going to have to pay for all of this. So anyway, we'll see where that goes yet. So,
But Steve, where do they propose to go with it? LA San has few choices.
yeah, well, right now, their choice, they have a choice of either doing, well, they don't have a choice anymore. If they backed up to their previous proposal that the regional board had told them they had to do, that wasn't this one, it would cost them even more, and that would be a whole brine line all the way down from Santa Clarita, down the Santa Clara River into the ocean. And that was going to be even more expensive. So the only other option they have to do is non-compliance and pay daily fines of whatever. We've heard people in Santa Clarita said regional board would never fine a city as large as Santa Clarita. We hear that and they say, well, they fine the city of Los Angeles, so I don't think they're going to think too much about fining you. So there's some public awareness problem up there right now. Let's put it that way. So. The other project that you probably haven't heard of, because it really hasn't seen the light of day particularly, this is a project that United Water is just starting to work on. It's being called tentatively here the East Side Project. And what it would do would be would pump water from the forebay, bring it down the OH pipeline, and you can see there's a nice little spot right there for an interconnect. Put an interconnect in here and supply extra water to the pumping trough pipeline. It's only a 1-mile pipeline. It's probably the cheapest project that can be done. I think United Water is going to be probably moving ahead on that one, although it's still in the way planning stage, and the board hasn't approved anything about that at this point yet. But those are the kind of projects we do, an easy one. Now, taking water out of the forebay, almost all these projects we're taking water out of the forebay, and we do have some limits there. We're not sure what they are at this point. The regional groundwater model says we can take quite a bit of water out of the forebay because it's when you get a wet year, it so readily refills. But, there are some limits to that. So that's another one of these projects that would do something more in the forebay.
And that, Madam Chair, is that water's going to Pleasant Valley, you said?
Well, this would probably go into the pumping trough pipeline.
Okay.
Just because of the two pipelines are so close together right there. The interconnect would be quite easy. The other project that's been sitting out there for quite a while is the Faro pit, which is currently owned by Vulcan. As you know, the gravel's been taken out of them. Unlike the River Park pits, they don't go down to groundwater. They go down to 5 feet above high groundwater. And United is right now working on some financing to buy the Faro pit. Along with that comes some GMA issues that we're probably going to come to this board fairly soon, and that's related to the allocations that come along with that property and what happens to those and the credits and everything else. So the Faro pit would be part of this longer-term goal of being able to take some of this silty, high-flow water and take it directly down to these pits, the Faro, maybe even the River Park as well, outside of the normal system of moving this water so it doesn't plug up the whole system. So, and of course, River Park pits right here are there already. The work hasn't quite been completed yet on stabilizing everything. Unfortunately, the developer developers are a little cash poor right now, so that kind of hung up things on finishing out the River Park. It also would take, to be able to put water in the River Park pits, it would either take completing more of the pipeline up to the River Park for recycled water, or probably having the Faro on some of this land here so you can bring a canal all the way down into both of those. Another project that's where the test program on this is just being started, and that's a seawater barrier project. Seawater injection barriers are the way that Los Angeles County and Orange counties keep seawater intrusion at bay. They're more expensive than anything we've done to date, so we've tried to avoid them. We think, however, that this might be a necessity anyway to be able to do this, and would certainly be part of one of these large solutions. It was in the GMA management plan, and it would look something like this, basically on the north and east sides of the current seawater intrusion that's shown there. That could be recycled water. That could be water pumped from the forebay. That could be some different combinations of things that would potentially go in there. So the preliminary design is there for one single test well to see how well it would work, and that test well would be someplace right about where the little symbol, the BAR, is. That, of course, would be if there was water, the GMA would get involved. If some of the water that was going into here, and probably some of it would be water pumped from the forebay. So that water pumped from the forebay and recharged over here. I think the proponents of this would probably ask that this be a wash, that's not really pumping. All you're doing is moving water from one aquifer to another in a beneficial way. And that directing hasn't been done directly by the GMA before, too. And the last project that I've got up here is buying additional state water. And right now, Casitas Municipal Water District and the City of Ventura both have water allocations, state water allocations that have only been used by United Water, where United Water has bought them in a couple of years. And this would potentially be acquisition, maybe year by year over a longer time period. And the water would be brought in the same way that United brings it in. And that is That's released through Pyramid Lake, down through Lake Piru, and then put on the back of the conservation flows that come out of Lake Piru. So that water would make it down onto the Oxnard Plain. That's something that can be done fairly easily. The problem about it is you pay that cost every year, and of course that's relatively expensive water. So that isn't certainly in the consideration as a cost benefit for that project. So anyway, that's kind of the update here of the things that you're going to see probably coming your way here in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Hopefully.
Let me just say, I really appreciate this chart. It's something I can pull out and keep, and I think it's going to be very handy, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Dr. Bachman, I was wondering if we were to be able to idle all the wells that still are functioning out in the Magoo area, would that alone, if it was replaced with surface water, would that alone accomplish much of the effort, or would the barrier wells still be needed?
I know who you've been talking to. That's a very interesting question, and it's certainly come up when there's been any discussion of these barrier wells. Are the barrier wells really needed if, in fact, you could take the pumping off of this area? Of course, taking the pumping off of this area that's no small issue. You need quite a bit of water to do that. One of the things that we're going to test with the groundwater model is just see exactly, what kind of recovery time it would take if you did that. The problem is we do have seawater intrusion here already, and the fact that it's going to take some time to develop all these projects may mean that we have to have the barrier, but maybe we don't have it over the long term. Maybe it's a shorter term project.
Part of my question, and I'm not a geologist, but you are. The problem is you've expressed in the past the perhaps that the Fox extends maybe even to Santa Cruz, and so if we're still drawing water from under the ocean, might we not be ruining our future supply if in the middle of our future supply we inject barrier water, which is in fact water inferior to that which is in the rest of the Fox?
Well, the water that would have to go in a barrier, that would go in any kind of injection, has to pass 2 tests. One with the Department of Public Health. They have some quite rigid restrictions, and the other one is on injected water, and the other one is with the regional board for any kind of anti-degradation. So those things would be looked at very carefully. We're talking right now, the water that would come from the OH system would be water that is the normal water that recharges that aquifer anyway. So that really wouldn't be, an issue. Yes, it's a little higher in TDS, but so's the Oxnard Plain. It's no different because it's the recharge water for the Oxnard Plain. The recycled water would probably be lower in most of the things that would be a concern. The issues, of course, that we hear a lot are what about pharmaceuticals, et cetera, all those kinds of things. And clearly that issue needs to be gone by. We're hearing from Orange County Water District that their testing shows that they don't have any of those constituents left after they do the same kind of testing that the city, or same kind of treatment that the city of Oxnard is doing. We haven't verified that with data yet, but hopefully we can get by that issue and we start talking specifics about what is the problem, if there's something different, is that a problem? Whenever you have one set of water and another set of water, they're always going to be different, and the question is just going to be, is that bad or not? So certainly things like the TDS are going to be quite a bit lower in the recycled water after it's been treated. So it's going to improve the aquifer for salts, which is a big issue.
Thank you.
I have one quick question too. Steve, does the barrier wells operate to actually push seawater out, or is it just strictly a barrier?
The answer is yes and yes. No, not. Well, I guess yes and no. What happens, and and this is so funny because I always have to explain this. When you think of injection wells, you think, someone's sitting there and turning up the pumps, and shoving this water down the ground. That's not the way it works. Injection wells, you're mostly just filling the wellbore up, and it's the gravity pushing it down. Maybe you can have a little bit of head, but all injection wells, the water that comes in is a higher head than what you actually can use. So you have to reduce the pressure to actually put it down. So So I've heard things of, oh, it's going to cost, there's so much energy-related injection. Well, there's not actually any energy. As a matter of fact, for Cayugas, their first 4 wells, they actually have power generation. So when that water goes down, it actually generates power, so it's a net plus. But what you do then is build a mound up of high water, and of course water flows from high to low, and so if you have a high mound in the barrier areas, that's going to mean that water is going to go both directions. You know, if the barrier is looking like this, some of it would flow back this way, and some would flow this way, and the water that flows out towards seawater is going to push that seawater out. So the answer to your question is yes. Now, could that push it out so we never see it again? That we don't know. I suspect it's not that simple, because we've certainly found in this area where, in the upper aquifer, where we've been able to push seawater back simply because that's in the area that we have good influence from the forebay, that the water came in this way and the push went down this way, and so we've pushed some of it down the beach a little bit as well, underneath the beach. So you're not guaranteed you're always going to, you may have to kind of flatten it against the coastline, so you may not be able to get it all out, but certainly it's going to contribute to getting it out. And that, in fact, of course, is what Orange County and LA counties, you know, once they build that up, because they had seawater, once they built that up, it pushed it back and it's holding it back, more or less. It still leaks through a little bit, but that's been, because they have this kind of situation behind it. They have real low water levels, way below sea level behind the barriers, and they're just pumping away and hoping the barrier, you know, holds that back. So.
And the only way the barriers work are to continue to be operated. If they were to be shut down at some point, then you lose the effectiveness, correct?
Well, they can be seasonal, because it is kind of a, you know, the effect doesn't go away immediately. So, if, for instance, you were putting a lot of the water to irrigation for 2/3 of the year, and 1/3 of the year you were injecting all or some of that water, you're still getting a net effect out of it. So if you shut it down for several years, then you lose the effect. So, you know, if you discontinued it, then you'd lose the effect of that.
Let me ask you a quick question too. Just all I know about water is you open up the tap and you get water, but how about rain? If it rains a lot, does that help? Does that help the barrier? If we had a lot of rain, like, you know, we did one time that rained all of February and so forth.
Well, rain certainly helps this part of the aquifer. And of course it fills the forebay up, and the more often we can fill the forebay up, the more we can take water out of it during the other times, and so that's always a help. In this portion of the aquifer, because there's a fault right down here that kind of keeps water from moving down across into the South Oxnard Plain and Pleasant Valley, when it rains there, they get some effect of the recharge, but the reason that water levels are down is they just aren't as well connected to recharge as the other basins are, so the effect is less pronounced. But we have more water to put in the barrier, potentially.
Any other questions? Good report. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second to receive and file. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we're down to action items. Number 6, adoption of fiscal year 2009-10 recommended final annual work plan and budget. Could we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Gerard Kapusik with Watershed Protection District and agency staff. And what I would propose to do, Madam Chair, is focus on the highlights of the difference between the preliminary budget that was presented at the last meeting and the budget that's presented to you today. But for Supervisor Zaragoza's benefit, I'd like to go through a little bit of background so you have a contextual understanding. So I'll try to balance that and look to your guidance, Madam Chair, if I go outside the envelope of acceptable balance. But if you might, out of personal indulgence, permit me 2 comments. In listening to Dr. Bachman's presentation, which I thought was an excellent tour de force of the supply side of this equation, which is absolutely vital to reaching safe yield. It cannot be reached on a demand side alone, not even in theoretical construct, and certainly with huge practical difficulties, costs, and unacceptable impact, particularly on agriculture, if that were to happen. And then clearly in your board's adoption of the 2007 GMP update, you recognize that. The attainment of the basin management objectives that are identified in that update are directly a result of supply projects. You cannot achieve 100% of the basin management objectives even with the supply projects, but without them, you're not even going to approach a reasonable safe yield. So it's really critical that we all remind ourselves that this is a double-sided equation, some sort of hybrid approach, and it's important that your board, in terms of adopting these plans, set the benchmarks for staff as you have. Just two brief comments. I was reminded in his comments, Dr. Bachman's comments about the Orange County Fountain Valley District. They were one of the pioneers in injection barriers down in Orange County, and I remember when I was in my water manager role at Channel Islands, we actually visited down there to the treatment plant, and I can attest to you today, in a B.T. Collins moment, that 20 years ago I drank that water straight out of the recycled tap after the osmosis, and I'm still alive. Now I do track the loss of my hair during that period.
Directly to that?
So there may be some unintended effects, but at least they're not mortal. That along the line. But your point about the barrier project is a critical one. It has, to the extent that it's there and part of the solution, it has to be continuous, or at least seasonal. The other part of it is that I know that all of you in local government are not particularly happy with Governor Schwarzenegger at this moment, perhaps the legislature as well. And I guess we've seen in the last couple of days that he's come true to his promise to blow up the boxes. And two of the boxes he seems to have focused on of interest to Supervisor Zaragoza, and one of them anyway, is the elimination of the integrated, and you, Madam Chair, the Integrated Waste Management Board. But also, a rather interesting one, he cajoled, convinced, blackmailed, extorted the opposite party and the legislature to agree to the abolishment of the State Board of Geologists and Geophysicists. So maybe we're going to enter a time of unregulated geology and geophysics. So we may have rogue geologists all having a different point of view on these things. So expect a multiplicity of viewpoints beyond just experts as a consequence of that.
I would suspect we just heard from one.
And to that extent, I'd like to then move on to the budget fairly briskly. The presentation overview slide, the items that are highlighted in bold and italicized represent the slides that I'd like to spend most of the time on. And I'll try to run through those. Obviously, and I want to try to address some of the comments that have been made about the budget, not in any defensive way, but just in a dialogue and understanding. Obviously, your board has been guiding the development of these budgets ever since I joined the staff here 5 years ago, very aggressively and very proactively. And the first step is the work plan. And this represents the second year of a planning effort that your board guided, directed, required, where we lay out how we're going to expend the lion's share of the resources, which essentially is staff in this agency. Because as your board is well aware, you're tasked by the legislature to essentially balance competing interests for the benefit of all. And that is a huge responsibility, and it requires a great deal of information and update. So the work plan that we presented to you at the previous meeting and you adopted at my majority vote, and you have the oversized version, essentially reported what we were able to achieve in 2008-9 by each of the tasks, and what we were proposing to be the work plan tasks, level of effort, and cost estimates for the next year. And as I indicated, that was adopted at the last meeting. Just in terms of comparison, we've broken up the tasks into two broad categories. Section 1, core services, which sort of could be looked at as the housekeeping, what has to be done under the legislation and the policies that your board has identified in the areas of administration, legal, technical, and specific projects. Then we've identified at your board's direction, beginning last year it was 10, this year it's 11 additional tasks that I think could be fairly described as dealing with legacy issues. And your board is well aware of the suite of legacy issues that we're dealing with, you're dealing with, and your stakeholders are dealing with. And so we're trying to get ourselves out of that legacy hole to bring us up to a current situation to, and particularly position the agency to help your board and the stakeholders
achieve safe yield. So this just essentially provides you a comparison of the effort last year and this year. And I do want to talk a little bit about the FTEs. And for those in the audience that are not familiar with that, that's a government bureaucratese that identifies full-time equivalent. Essentially, there are 2,080 hours in a calendar year at an 8-hour work week. I'm sorry, an 8-hour a day, 5-day-a-week work week. It is viewed by most human resources professionals and budget professionals that 1,800 hours of those are productive. The remainder reflecting time off, sick leave, vacation, general sorts of administrative. And so from our purposes of our budget, when we talk about an FTE, it's the equivalent of 1,800 hours of work by, in our case, not a single employee, but pieces of various employees. But overall, as you can see, the number has been around 2.5 to 3 FTEs. That's not changing in this next budget. Now, to look at the source of use and fund summary table, let me talk a little bit about some of the changes. First of all, in terms of the fiscal year-end 0809 fund balance, we actually had a considerable increase because the figure that we had reported to you at the last meeting did not include the $80,000 Thornhill Miller settlement. We had received it in between the time of the last meeting and now. So essentially, we're starting with a somewhat larger year-end fund balance. Then we're projecting, and your board confirmed those projections, what operating revenues will be. And I want to highlight here that these are very conservative projections. Your board has said project at 97% of the long-term average of pumping in the agency, which is higher than the safe yield, but it in fact reflects what's happening out there in response to weather and market conditions. Your board also agreed to only budget for a bare minimum of surcharge payments, which is a conservative projection. So when you add those revenues to the year-end fund balance, we start the year with just over $2.4 million available to finance this year, or 9/10, and future year expenses. We then subtract the components of the work plan, which are the first two items, the non-labor cost estimates, which essentially service, supply, legal services, and in this case, the database project, which we'll talk about more. We identify the contingency, and normally it's $100,000, but as a result of the database discussion, which we haven't yet finalized, we're putting some money there that your board can use in the future should it decide to do so and approve that. So if that all pans out and we use those designations, in June of next year, we would be looking, or the requirements of expenditure for this next year is just over $1 million. So in June of next year, we'd have a fund balance of 1.4 as opposed to nearly 1.6 that we had this year. However, that fund balance has three components. Just over $215,000 of that is designated sequestered by your board policy for GEMS fund litigation. Approximately $600,000 were attributable to the settlement payments and then a capital reserve. So we would have available at the close of next year, June of next year, just shy of $670,000 to fund fiscal 10-11. And as you've seen in the budget, we've projected for 5 years. But what happens each budget year, we revisit those 5-year out-year projections per your board's discussion. So we are fiscally sound and we're balanced. This is just another way of showing the same information in terms of the highlight, so I won't spend much time on that. This will give you a historical chart, and you can see that it's not so much a $500,000 increase in 1 year, but rather, as more folks have pumped, the beginning year fund balance is increased. And that's been the leveling, or the increase point, in terms of our revenues. Similarly, with projections, your board approved $510,000 in revenue, which is on the basis of 97% of the long-term pumping average. This compares, again, the 9/10 budget with last year's actual and over the last 3 years. And again, you see the major difference is the beginning year fund balance based on higher pumping. The other major, the actual extraction charges revenue number is within the bounds of what's been the case. The other major increase, of course, is surcharge and penalties. You'll see in 0809 that the agency received just shy of $640,000
in surcharge and penalties. And the lion's share of that is reflected by the Howling settlement payment and the Howling surcharge on what still is residual over and above the settlement payment amount. I believe in this spreadsheet, I think it's approximately 70%. So that's a major increase is associated with that. This makes my earlier point about the number of people. As you can see, historically, we've been averaging around 2.5 to 3 FTEs, and we're not looking at going over that. Your board, per policy decision, has set aside wisely, on average, $100,000 a year for unanticipated contingencies. So within your budget base is that capacity should you need it. And that's been a wise move, and you see how it's been used. To the extent that it's not used, it simply increments the year-end fund balance. And in 910, because of the reason of the database project, which we'll talk about in a second, it's a little bit larger. But again, that's subject to your discussion and approval. You can see the comparison in terms of year-end fund balance history, and you can see how it's grown primarily because of higher pumping and higher surcharges, not because of higher costs. Again, if the budget is adopted as proposed and all revenues are earned and all expenditures embedded in 910 are made, you would have approximately, the agency would have approximately 1.4 projected year-end fund balance, and it would be composed of these 3 components. And then in terms of our recommendations, we would recommend that we'd answer any questions that you may have, hear any public comments, and you move to adoption. I would like to say, with respect to, if I might just very briefly, covering from a staff perspective the 4 points, I think we've covered the first 2 points with respect to the increase in the budget and the FTEs. With respect to facilitating projects, your board has adopted that as policy in the GMP, and staff supports and works towards adoption of that policy. But it might be useful to think about it in terms of the difference between the Federal Reserve Board and the Securities and Exchange Commission. To some extent, the statute essentially places your board in the position of being the Securities and Exchange Commission, regulating the conditions in which groundwater as a commodity, as a resource, is either incentivized, reduced pumping, or new supply to replace pumping, or in some combination. You're not quite in the position of being the Federal Reserve Bank. You don't quite have the resources, even with these increased surcharges, to appreciably commit to any one or a suite of projects. But you do have very powerful tools in the groundwater management plan update, the policies, the facilitation, the collaboration. So there are many ways to affect the desired result, and your board has a suite of options to look at. I would just ask you to remember the level of effort in the groundwater management plan update and the tremendous amount of brain power, collaboration, and options. And I think this spreadsheet is very useful, but you will notice that in terms of the dollar amounts, Dr. Bachman didn't put any dollars in there. He put signs, which indicate a qualitative relative. I assume more dollar signs, the more expensive the project. But the actual amounts of these, pardon? Just like a servo. Right. But the actual amount of these projects are considerable. So to make an investment of public resources on a margin to tip a project to be cost-effective or not may not be the best way to look at this. But in any event, your board has a suite of options. You have a lot of power in terms of those options, in terms of bringing folks together, and you have the role of balancing the interest. So perhaps you don't have Bernanke's checkbook, but you do have the wisdom of Solomon in balancing those interests. So
The wisdom of Solomon. Other questions?
And the contingency capacity?
Yes, sir.
The is that what, about 5%, or what is the?
It's approximately about 12%.
12%.
Right.
And is that meant for normal for?
Generally, the range from 7.5% to 15%, depending upon the level of uncertainty. Normally, we're at about 8 or 9% at 100,000. But because of the
Looking at-
fact that we're not yet in a position to bring to you the database project, we want to set that aside, and then you'll have the ability to deal with that should you decide.
Because the budget was, what, $2 million or, oh, no, that's revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the budget's $1 million, okay.
Yeah.
And then we're using, what, 115,000 of that?
If you approve in September the database project and you fund it to the level of the 115, that would come out of contingency and go to that line item, and you would still have 100,000 remaining for other contingencies. So those are a series of ifs.
Which is about 10, 11, 12%.
Would be a little bit under that.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty reasonable.
Any other questions?
That's it.
Any other questions? No? Okay, is there anybody out there who'd like to talk to us about the budget and specific things? Mr. Matthews.
Good afternoon. John Matthews, Pleasant Valley County Water District. First, I want to apologize for my comments coming so late. I mean, it just seems like they come right at the 11th hour. I've been through enough budget sessions with many of you on the dais today that I know that this is tough times when you come at the last minute and ask for changes. And I'm not sure I'm really asking for specific changes in the budget, but more of philosophical issues on it. This may be the first time I've ever spoken on a budget before this board or any other board, because I find them really boring for the most part. I know they're really important. And I wish I could get excited as Gerard gets. But I did bring some of my concerns up at the last SAG meeting, which was after your last meeting, the day after your last meeting, after I had a chance to think about it and look at it, and I've had discussions with individuals since then. And two items I want to hit on, and I think they echo what Mr. Underwood said and Mr. McIntyre said to some extent. You know, one thing is the use of penalties. I think the utilization of penalties or surcharges as a revenue stream, again, I'm not a budgetary guy, but I'm not sure that's a real good way to operate things because you don't know they're going to be there year in and year out. And I appreciate the concept that you're trying to, as I understand it, dig yourself out of a data hole at this period of time. So some of that goes to things like that. But the penalties came because people pumped water when they shouldn't have, or in excess of what they should have. The two big penalties you have occurred in the Pleasant Valley County Water District. That's water that my constituents can't use. You know, I heard earlier the concept of, you know, we all hear this buzzword, shovel-ready projects. Well, the budget as I look at it are computer-ready and pencil-ready studies, not projects. And I know there's a philosophical difference as to whether or not you ought to be involved in projects or whether you just ought to regulate and study things. And I think that we could talk about that until we're blue in the face. You know, I think when you have an opportunity to promote a project, including spending money for that project that is going to conserve water or create water, I think you ought to do it. I don't think you need to study it to death. You know, I've been appearing before this board since day one, and you know, we have lots of studies that tell us the conditions of the aquifers right now. We can do more studies and find out that we're in worse position than we think we are in different positions. But I understand last time Chair Mulhart made the comment, I think it was a good one. You have such small amount of money, I mean really, when you think of it in terms of large projects, that a certain amount of money going and tipping a project one way or the other is probably not going to happen on the GREAT program, for example, where you have tens of millions of dollars. You don't have anything that's going to tip that project one way or the other. Some of the smaller projects, I would argue that perhaps you do. The TAP project, for one, is one where I think that a grant of money, if it's legal, and I haven't thought through that, might carry that project. Is that going to solve all our problems? No. Is it going to make everybody in the county happy? No. But it's a step. It's taken that penalty money, which was watered out, and as opposed to studying things, put the money to work building infrastructure. You know, perhaps, as Dr. Bachman Steve said, the East Side project that they're concerned. That might be, I don't know if it's a $10 million, $5 million, whatever. One of the stumbling blocks on the TAP program has been a $600,000 capital component for Camarosa. Well, you've got that kind of money that can tip that project. And that's another 3,000 acre-feet at a minimum. And if we lose that project, it's 9,000 acre-feet that are now gone. So I think you ought to always, I know you people, I know you're good stewards of the money. And I know you're not going to just take the money and send it off to studies, just to do studies. But I think we always have to look at what's the best bang for our buck. And I don't think we need to be fiddling away with more studies if there are concrete projects that we can do and make a difference in. One other issue that came up at the SAG meeting that kind of drives me semi-crazy is this boundary issue that we talked about last time, where we have these gaps, you know, and we want to close those gaps. Well, I would certainly hope we don't go out and study those gaps, drill some monitoring wells. You know, we can count the angels on the head of the pin till we're out of water. You know, I hope you move quickly on that. You don't budget a lot of staff time or a lot of studies to do that. You bring the boundaries together, or you work with the people involved here. Gerhard's done a good job of that. And maybe it's Pleasant Valley coming and being consistent with what's being done in the Las Postas. We put a moratorium on well drilling. We put limits on how much we can pump. We're willing to do that. I feel a lot better about doing that than using this penalty money to go do some studies so we know exactly on the ground. We think, well, that's the Pleasant Valley Basin, and this is the Las Postas Basin. Well, great. Whoop-de-doo. 2 years later, we've had water pumped out of there because we couldn't get the boundary exactly right. Let's get it as close as we can now, and then worry about the consequences later. You know, I think this group, this agency's done a great job over the years, and I'd hate to see it become a situation where we just have study after study after study. Thanks for letting me ramble on for a while.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions, Mr. Matthew? Okay. Anybody else who'd like to speak to us on the budget? Okay, we have two people coming forward. Nope. Go ahead.
Henry Gromlich, Cayugas Municipal Water District. I'll be brief. I would like to reiterate what John Matthews mentioned. We did have a discussion at SAG, and I realize you're on the cusp of trying to figure out your budget, but this is probably not too early to begin your policy consideration for the next fiscal year. Cayugas would certainly support the earmarking of penalties for really investment in trying to address the supply side of the GMA's equation here. As John said, it's maybe in the larger scheme of things like building salinity management pipelines or the GREAT program, a relatively small amount of money, but it can make a great difference on small projects that will have the benefit of year after year after year bringing in water. And I think that's the kind of effort that the GMA should be looking at. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Hi, Carol Schoen, Zone Mutual Water Company. And I think we're all going to pretty much say the same thing to you, that we've been attending the SAG and the TAG meetings, and we've spent a lot of time going through this matrix, discussing what the group felt the best use and the best policies for the board to follow. And our conclusions on that, number one at the very top, was that the penalty money be used for new sources of water or capital projects. So I just hope that you can appreciate that the time and effort that went in to all of our efforts in studying everything, that's really what we felt the board should pay attention to, and use the penalty monies towards a capital project, much as what's been described. And I do budgeting, and I know this is kind of at the last minute to try, and you don't certainly want to nitpick through a work plan at this point in time. A lot of effort has been put in by the staff, and I understand and appreciate there is lots of cleanup to do over the last number of years and what they're trying to accomplish. But in looking at the PWAC charges, and we do come down to a recommendation that there's 2.8 full-time equivalents. Just so you realize, that doesn't include Mr. Bondi in that equivalent, because that 565 is just basically the total of the staff. So Mr. Bondi's time is another line item on that budget. And then there's a little bit of confusion on my part in looking at the budget, because does that PWAC charge also include all of the time for legal? Because there's another line item for $40,000 in legal. So I think the point here is it's taking staff, and it's growing and growing and growing, and yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but at the same time, if those penalties aren't here in a year or two, what's going to keep the staff supported at the level that it's grown? So I think there's a danger in employing people and growing this, and how do you then take it back? So I'm concerned, and I think maybe Henry's point that we go with what's in place for this year, but next year's budget, that there'd be a lot of consideration to the fact that it can't be sustained on penalties. So that's all. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Mr. Zaragoza.
Not knowing much about it, but I'm sure that the budget has a capital project accounts and dollars for capital projects. And what I'm hearing now is apparently there's some penalty monies that are in the budget. And my question would be, if you use a penalty money for a project, how do you sustain the project or the cost of that project to fund it through 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the project is? You know, just to clear my mind. I'm not sure what.
Excellent question, Director Zaragoza, and proving the point that you have the wisdom of Solomon, because both conditions would apply. First of all, there is no defined capital account because by statute we don't operate any projects. And this was the point about it's not so much studying to death, but you have to balance the interest, and you do that through a plan, through ordinances, through policies that incentivize certain behavior and disincentivize others, or that cause projects such as the 7 or 8 that were identified to be looked at in terms of how they impact one or each other, and that's very important. So just to give you just 30-second benefit of context, last year when the board struggled with this and looked ahead, we were not quite in the same fiscal condition. We had a single settlement payment, the Thornhill-Miller settlement payment, and the board said spend up to that amount as part of operating expenses so we don't have to adjust the pump charge for several years in the future. So you have to balance these out. What's occurred in 08-09 primarily, and I don't mean to pick on them, but just because it happened, was the howling matter. The howling matter brought in a considerable new settlement stream for the next 5 years, plus to the extent that even after that they're continuing to pump over their allocations as they have been.
So they're paying penalties.
Exactly. So the revenue stream, the settlement revenue stream, has been influenced greatly over the next 5 years. So the model, the business model, is sustainable for the next 5 years with the cost base at the $675,000 PWAC, or a combination of charges. The 565 PWAC plus Mr. Bondi's United charge and council's charge. So the business model. Now, your board can redirect that any way it wishes, but to the extent that you redirect, you have implications here. So I think some of the suggestions that were made that over the next year, your board through these water supply projects give us guidance, direction, look at this, how can we incorporate this in the business model, either for projects where a certain amount of money would be the tipping point, or for a series of whatever. There are a range of opportunities here available. Right. And be aware, and let me just say this, one of the reasons those numbers are high is we've made a deliberate decision, you've made a deliberate decision to budget conservatively. You're not.
Which means we estimate high expenses and low income.
I would say that we estimate only known income, but history has proven that people pump more than the known income. So that's not good from a resource standpoint, but it does provide you with that growing balance.
And if everybody was to follow the rules, then you deplete that amount.
That's correct. So you have there's a problem, but that's the case with resource, right? I mean, this is the old argument: if you conserve water, why does it cost you more, right?
And I don't know much about the water part of it, but you know, the budget a little bit. You know, so I'm just trying to get that straight in my mind.
Right.
Okay.
Did I address your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Then I'll open it up for discussion. Oh, I'm glad everybody's jumping in at once.
Okay, I'll start since I've got a reputation of being a flag waver. the people in ag who I talk to are not happy with the way this budget looks. And I think I would agree with that perception. There's a perception, and maybe some of it not rightly perceived, but because there is some cleanup work, some what I call the last meeting housekeeping work. Call them legacy issues if you like, and those things need to be dealt with, and I support getting those done. I'm not sure I agree with the estimates of what it's going to take to get them done, but these are worst case estimates, so it makes sense. But, and then I want to, before I get too deep, Gerard, you do a great job on these. This is better information than we had when I first came on. It continues to be in adequate detail and depth, and if someone just spends the time and goes through it, it's quality information. I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
But you said that the business model is sustainable. I think there's no question. We've raised enough money, and we can sustain this kind of operation for a long time. The comment that's being made is that it's the wrong direction. People don't want to see this agency become a command and control agency. They want to see it be a facilitator, a clearinghouse, a place where projects are discussed, and we help with policy. We help with allowing people to pump degraded water and fix it. That generates new supply. Those are the things that haven't been done so far that people complain about. And so when people say that they're concerned with what they see, and I'm concerned with it. And the spreadsheets here talk about writing reports and redefining the problem. We know the problems. We've got a degraded aquifer that's saltwater intruded, and we're not going to fix it by command and control alone. We do have to fix the overpumping problems, and we have to fix a lot of these legacy type issues, but we also have to get what I've been calling new water. Encouraging recycled water projects, encouraging pipelines to connect areas where we have the 4-bay water, and we can send it to. There's just a lot of solutions out there that GMA needs to be a facilitator towards. So I'm supportive in solving these legacy problems. I've mentioned many times I want to have that water lawyer hired and review all of our legislation and ordinances and make sure that we have firm legal footing to stand on so that we can make those decisions and do what we're here to do, to protect the aquifers. But at the same time, I really would like to see a change in just the way this appears. We appear to be doing a lot of report writing and a lot of desktop regulating and not a lot of facilitating. So that's my comments.
Okay. Dr. Kelly.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, thank you. I was looking back over the minutes of last month, and if you want my feelings, you can go back and read last month's minutes. I think that the long-term employee base of this agency should be supported by the pump tax, and I feel it's an amoral use of penalty money to supply men and machines. It should be used either to purchase new water or create more water. We went through a period here where I attended enough TAG and SAG meetings to supply the nation. I listened at length while the city of Camarillo brought their presentation in. Some staff members here sat and looked at the ceiling, looked at the walls, didn't want to hear it. In the end, enough little speed bumps were placed that project went away. Madam Chairman, I think that was a very sad moment.
Actually, it was about 12 times as expensive
I
as we had anticipated.
I don't disagree with it.
And that was more than a little speed bump for
Well,
us.
the problem was that the attitude that this is a regulatory agency and not an implementation agency pervades everything. So Gerard and I spoke after last month's meeting. I think that some of the provisions in the budget are good. but on the whole of it, I disagree with the philosophical basis of it. I think Schwarzenegger has the right plan, Gerard. You can go back, cut everything by 40%, and you got a budget.
Mr. Zaragoza.
Being, new at, as far as the water's concerned again, but I've always seen a budget as a guideline, a roadmap to get us from point A to point B. And I don't know all the details and the feelings of the users, but I think that that possibly, for the future, that the penalty monies and the use of penalty monies should be an issue where we probably have the stakeholders and the public sharing their concerns, with the board and with staff to see the proper use of those dollars. But of course, you also have to have dollars to run an agency. I mean, an agency does not run by itself. You need staff, and you need individuals to guide, the use of water. And I just got appointed to the AWA, and I hear the horrific stories of over-pumping, in the Las Posas area, and seawater intrusion in South Oxnard, and the overuse of water. So I think that regulations need to be put together before we run out of water. And I think that I'm not sure if the budget is good, bad, or indifferent, but I think we do need a budget. And I think that in the future, that probably maybe 2-3 hearings in the budget should be appropriate as to how those dollars should be used, and can we use those penalties for infrastructure, for capital projects. I think you need to be able to sustain those projects, whether it's a 3-year project, 5-year project, or a longer-term project. But I still believe that you need a budget, whether this budget is that budget or not. But I think we need to support the agency to get the stakeholders to a level of satisfaction, and of course you're never going to have 100% approval in the budget, but we'll need to support this budget.
Well, I'm going to lean my heart, so you're not going to get a lot of words of wisdom out of me. But I think what I'm hearing here is that long before the start of the preparation of the next budget, we need to sit down and have a study session, maybe 2 study sessions, where the board can talk, where the interested people or the stakeholders can talk, and we can make a decision and give some specific direction to staff on how to proceed in future budgets. And we'll be, at that time, we need to hear, staff's druthers. We have engineers who are now working for us who want to get every little thing down exact. We have attorneys who usually talk to us, who usually want everything exact, or somebody's going to be afraid of being litigated, although Mr. Matthews spoke in the other direction today. And then we have people who'd like us to get on with working and funding some projects, especially in the areas where the penalties have occurred and used water that people in those basins couldn't use. Those are all things that I think we need to discuss as a board. In the meantime, Mr. Zaragoza is right. We do need to do something about a budget for the current year. We didn't have these particular discussions, although Mr. Borchard and Mr. Kelly, Dr. Kelly, encouraged us to do so for the past several months. So we need to act on this budget, and then, if necessary, we need to give staff some direction as to specific titles for future agenda items, or for timing of study sessions to deal with upcoming budgets, or we can look at it as dealing with the current budget. A budget is a working document that can be changed at any time during the year, and bringing it back for future discussion. So how would you like to proceed on this?
Can I share something else?
Sure.
I'm sure that, like other agencies, we probably have a mid-year budget review.
Well, actually, we have quarterly.
We have
Quarterly
quarterly
is even
budget
better.
reviews.
And I think the chairman said it very well, you know, if we need to adjust, we can adjust accordingly. And the quarter's even better than a semi-annual or mid-year budget, you know, just to share some additional information here.
Okay, so what are your wishes on the budget at hand? No wishes?
Need a motion?
Okay, Mr. Zaragoza?
I'll make a motion that we approve the budget.
Okay. Is there a second?
And also, of course, you know, with the reviews and as appropriate in quarterly.
Is there a second? Okay, at the risk of having a split vote, I will second it. All in favor, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hands just to make it clear for the tape recorder. All in favor of...
Raise our hand for the tape.
Okay, that's two. Okay, opposed?
Opposed?
Opposed. Okay, so we have 2 and 2. So is there another motion? Are there other ways you would like to, how would you change the budget that you could support it?
Well, Madam Chairman, I think that we're 40% over budget. What I envision the budget should be. A simple, dirty answer is cut it 40% straight across the board.
On the expenditure side, I gather you're taking.
Yeah, I hold firm to the opinion that the income other than pump charges should be used for beneficial purposes and not necessarily expended on manpower.
Okay.
And what would be the impact on the budget from Mr. Kapusik on the 40% reduction?
So is that your opinion? Are you making a motion? I'm not sure I understand.
I'm not sure if Gerard feels that he can do that as a practical item or not.
Well, your board can set the budget in any way it wishes, but there are implications of all actions that have to be weighed. So if you were suggesting to, let me make sure I understand your point from a mechanical standpoint, not a policy standpoint. You're suggesting to reduce all charges to coincide with the total amount of pump charge revenues and interest?
Well, our previous budgets have run around 100,000 a year, about 550, 530, 530. So somewhere in that range was an acceptable budget based on income from pump charge derivation. That's a budget I would accept.
Well, from a numerical standpoint, the impact of that would be that the work plan numbers that are identified would have to be cut to conform to that cap. How best to do that is hard to do right here and now.
Well, and that's why if you want a simple and dirty fast one, we'll just cut everything by 40% and walk away. Or if you want to work on it for 3 months, that's your choice.
Madam Chair, the implications, if I were just to cut to the chase, if you look at the work plan and you look at the core task, essentially the additional task, the 10, I believe, would certainly have to go away. We'd be back down to the core tasks, which are about 452,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gerard.
No, that is another way to look at it, which means that effectively we'd have suspension on most of the legacy issues because you would not have funded tasks to address the cost to address them.
And I just point out that the core task, that's historically what we've had in terms of a technician, a staff geologist, and time for an executive officer and the clerk.
Well, just a minute. Dr. Kelly has the floor, I believe. Is that?
I relinquished before.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to ask a question. Legal, what are the mandated legalities here? And if we reduce the proposed budget by 40% or 45%?
Well, the construct of the work plan is that the mandated requirements are both in the core tasks and in some of the legacy some of the additional tasks, because some of the additional tasks has to do with cleaning up, surcharge, overpumping, unpaid bills, what have you. So it's a little hard to be Solomon at that level and break it out. And I'm not trying to avoid a direct answer to a direct
And
question.
these are things
but-
that we had agreed to do.
Exactly.
That's the problem I'm having. Let me just say, I have a problem with taking a budget and just cutting everything by a certain amount, every number over here in this column. The reason I have a problem with that is that maybe some things can be done away with entirely, but other things can't be cut by 40%. So I've always had a problem with that. Excuse the reference, but when I hear that, heard several years ago the county cut everything 10%, I'm thinking, some things maybe should be cut 25% or gotten rid of, and other things they're getting down to where you can't do the core items when you cut that by a certain percentage. So I have a problem by a certain percentage on everything. So if that's a recommendation, I'm having a hard time dealing with that one, just to get that out on the floor. I'm not sure what we're going to do. I think that we have to do something because we have people who are going to be working for us without a budget if we don't adopt something today. Mr. Blanchard, do you have thoughts on this? I know that you have spoken to some of the legacy items in the past.
Maybe a way to reconcile it, because a lot of the comments I hear, and I have to say I kind of believe them. Some of these legacy costs, though they have bunched up on us as of late, people might argue that that should have been GMA's work all along. I think there's some validity to that. And so, I don't know. In order to move forward, clearly the agency needs a budget to continue to operate. Perhaps Dr. Kelly would be in agreement to look at maybe knocking down the budgeted amount for the additional tasks by, say, $100,000. In other words, you'd have your...
about halfway there.
I understand your frustration, and I've heard it from others, and yet Gerard is correct. We have instructed staff to go after some of these legacy issues, and fairly not all of them, I think, were under the purview of past staff. So some of them have been just things that have needed to get cleaned up to make this a professional organization. So I can't say that I, for one, am against all the additional tasks. I could sit here and specifically list off ones that I don't think merit the kind of attention given here, but if we're intent on passing a budget at this point, and the concern is that this current budget is maybe overestimated, then maybe that is a way to go about it. Fund the core tasks, which I think realistically probably do encompass some of these additional, there's overlap in some of the additional work. Last year, I don't think staff expended all the dollars that they had estimated or had budgeted for. I think there's just an issue of they've got other responsibilities in watershed protection, so there's just they're not able to get to all the things that they've listed here, I think. I don't know what you think of that concept.
Well, Director Borchard, I would only point, philosophically, what I see here is that we're developing by allowing the idea to move forward to use the penalty monies as a ongoing funding source, that I've used the analogy before, I'll use it again, they've tasted the blood, the flavor of the blood of the penalty money, and it tastes pretty good. And that the desire to go out and aggressively go after people who may have not egregiously committed an error, they're going to be attacked with the same aggression and vehemence that a true abuser was. And Chairman Mulhart gave me a long and defined lecture on that last month, and I wish he was here so I could argue the point again. I think that this agency should not become addicted to the eating of penalty money. The penalty money should be used for beneficial purposes, and if we want to fund a larger agency, we should tax ourselves for it through the pump tax. Lynn suggested that he would do that as an ongoing way of funding this greater and expanded agency. I think that fight is yet to come. It's going to be deferred if he does that. The fight will come when the penalty money runs out and they've run out of people. I was pointing out earlier today, and I forgot who it was, when I was in the service, I had to frequently travel through a town named Ludiwiki, Georgia. Ludiwiki, Georgia funded their entire city budget by giving everybody who came through that town with a New York license plate a ticket. You could not pass through Ludiwiki, Georgia without getting a ticket. I was driving a government issue sedan every time I went through there, so they didn't stop me very much. But that whole concept is immoral, amoral, should not be allowed, and I see it coming down the road in this group. Thank you.
Madam Chair, at the risk of, you can always tell me to shut up, the risk of intruding on policy, you have sort of three buckets in which to try to tackle this problem. One is the bucket that you're on, which is essentially from a top-down dollar number, where do you get 3 votes? Another way to do it is you essentially tie performance metrics to either the first quarter or semi-annual review. You'll have several months of water supply project updates, which will give you some better indication of numbers and which projects you could apply some of these penalty monies at that point in time, you know, on the cusp, on the margin, the big projects, and what are, if you give here, what do you do here? I mean, there are a lot of balance points you have to grapple with, not me. You have to grapple with as a group in order to balance the interests. The other is you can restrict to the core tasks and revisit at that point. But the problem with uncoupling the plan now is we're going to have to make abrupt decisions to terminate certain initiatives that have already begun. And we're going to be forced, in the absence of your meetings, to make judgment calls that really, me personally, is uncomfortable for a staff member to make, and I think is is not really a good balance of policy and administration. So, you have complete discussion and discretion on what you wish to do. It is your budget, not mine. But unfortunately, there are consequences of any actions, including the compromise action, that may gain.
Gerard, I apologize not for bringing it to a head today, because I brought it to the issue last month. I'm not saying anything today that I didn't visit earlier. So I think that this issue has been brought adequately to staff's attention in the past by myself.
Well, I think that just to respond, I think staff responds to, as Stan Daly used to say, this is everything and this is nothing. And there weren't this many more agreeing with you. So the budget doesn't reflect your comments, because there weren't two other people saying the same thing. It doesn't say you have to change your feelings today. But I think we do have to sit here and discuss something until we can come to an agreement as to how we're going to solve, what we're going to do with the budget. We didn't vote it down, we didn't vote it up. But we need to do something, or we don't have money to operate until sometime late in September. Mr. Zaragoza.
Mr. Board Chair, is it $100,000? You said $100,000 if we reduce it by $100,000.
That was just an idea for a compromise, yeah.
I don't know, you have $100,000 in a contingency fund. It's like, say, here we're gonna buy the house and buy the car and the whole thing, and we have nothing in the bank, for a contingency. So,
well, you have, and I'm only suggesting these as helpful guidance points for you, and you have to weigh the valuation, because again, there are consequences of every decision. I think that from a systemic standpoint, it would be imprudent to remove a contingency fund. But that's your judgment call.
I'm just,
with respect to if 100,000 reduction in the core cost or in the cost side of the budget garners 3 votes, and 3 of you are comfortable with that, it is better to tie it to a specific effort. And as
Yeah.
much as I would like to see, and I think staff would view the investment in the database upgrade as critical to help us get out of this legacy hole and to help you balance some of these tough issues. And you've seen the problem when we come to you and things are not done in the way they should have been done. It causes a great amount of time. So if you're going to tie it to something that's defined, has time bound, and you can understand the impacts of that so that you can reconsider that decision if and when you decide to. The second part of this is you might want to wait till you have the entire 5 members here, because 1/5 of your stakeholders are not represented today, and this isn't a judgment call, it's simply a description along the line. And Dr. Kelly, I don't take anything that you've said either, and your point's personal, this is strictly business. It's entirely your decision. But I am called upon to mechanically make whatever you decide work to a level of effort that, in my own conscience, and more importantly for your board's protection and standard of care, doesn't cause a bigger problem.
Madam Chair, then what is the timeline legally that we have to adopt this budget by? Maybe the council can.
The statute, there is actually not in our enabling statute a requirement for an annual budget. There is in the general government code for all public agencies to have an operating budget. Council would have to opine whether you could defer adoption for a month, what the impact would be. I'm unaware of a specific statutory requirement other than the general one of adoption of annual budgets for public agencies are an intrinsic requirement.
Yeah, I don't think there is one either. I think the concern would be more from an operational standpoint. The GMA has no staff of its own. It contracts all of its services either with the county or with United. And at some point, if a budget were not approved until September, you might have a cash flow problem under those contracts for services to provide staff time. Now, another alternative is the board does not have to wait until its next regular meeting. You could schedule a special meeting to consider a revised budget proposal.
We don't have full board, so.
I wouldn't be opposed to a special meeting.
Okay. I think if we're going to do that, we need to schedule one as quickly as we possibly can. Because I don't know, I assume that the county finance department, or whatever you call it in the county, similar to the finance department in the city, is the one that acts as the GMA's banker.
That's correct. That's right.
I know how the city operates because I deal with them with some other government agencies that contract with the city of Camarillo for banking services, and unless there is an adopted budget, they will not write checks. So I think that...
Maybe we can have a furlough.
we can have a furlough. That wouldn't be just for employees, but anybody else we owe money to.
IOUs.
Remember, I told you you were not the Federal Reserve.
Can't make our own money. I think that we need to plan on having a meeting as soon as possible when, if we're going to go that way, when the full board can be present. And I do know that the Board of Supervisors takes a furlough in August.
We have two, 4th and 11th of August, we're still in session.
Oh, you're still in session? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then maybe it can be scheduled when Mr. Mulhart will be present too, unless there is another possible solution today. Sure.
I know that Carol Schoen from Zone Water.
Could you just speak into the mic?
Sure. Carol Schoen from Zone Mutual Water Company. I've worked with a resource conservation district in the past, and there's been some difficulty over budgeting that extended beyond the time frame that the county needed the budget. And what they would do temporarily is adopt last year's ending balances as this year's going forward budget. So you could look at the revenue stream that's been put in place for this year, and then just refer back to the prior year's ending balances, which gives you a start of total expenditures of $562,000. Then that gives something to go to the county, and you can update it once you've had your meeting. So you could adopt that today. It puts you back to something that the agency can continue to function and work on. It gives the finance department something to post, is what they're going to be looking for, and allows you time to then work through updating what that budget will be in a month or two. So that's just something that I know has been done in other agencies.
Let me just, I was writing, but I didn't finish what you said. Adopt the prior year's ending balances as,
Yes, the total ending expenditures last year that were presented, there's a total of $562,682 in expenditures. You could use what has been put forth as this year's total revenue and just temporarily adopt that expenditures as the expenditures on the balance or the budget that you're going to put in play until you can update what you can do through, working through this. But that would give you something in place today, and then you wouldn't be so stressed over the fact that, the month of August is dark.
thank you for suggesting that. Let me just ask if there is a possibility we could agree to that for today.
But can I ask
Yes.
is that acceptable? Or do we actually have to do that?
Again, you don't have to. It's more of an operational question of whether the auditor controller will continue to make payments under the contract with the county, and whether waiting until September will jeopardize that arrangement.
But you were thinking of a special meeting, right, even?
But it takes a while to get a special meeting.
We certainly could solicit the board members' availability, and we can do that very quickly, try and get a hold of Lynn.
Madam Chairman, would that not, you would continue at the same level that we are currently?
Right.
So that,
We would
I don't see
continue.
that would endanger the agency at all until we could have a study.
That's right.
I don't think it would either. And then if we could have another session,
Absolutely.
we'll have the other session, but this is a bridge, so to speak,
Absolutely.
in my mind.
But my concern was only is that is that an appropriate way of doing it, or can we just wait?
Well, the item on the budget on the agenda is to adopt a budget, and so we'd be adopting last year's balances as a temporary.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I move that we adopt last year's ending balance as our budget and proceed from there.
Is there a second to that motion?
I would second that, but let's amend it, if you wouldn't mind, to schedule a study session or a special meeting, whatever is appropriate, to hash these issues out, and so we don't spend board time in September doing
A
this again.
special meeting where the budget is the only item on the agenda.
Okay?
Is that,
I'll second that amendment.
okay. So we have,
For clarification purposes, do I understand you? I'm not sure, this is not designed to thwart anything, but just to understand. Is the concept that you're adopting you're taking the year-end fund balance at June 30th, and you're adopting last year's actual expenditures, which is a lower amount than the current proposed, as a placeholder budget?
right.
Okay. And is that inclusive of contingent, and I'm just trying to understand, is it inclusive of an expenditure for contingency or not? Because if you adopt last year's expenditures, it doesn't show any use of contingency, so I think you need to at least
Well, I
address.
think if we're doing a temporary budget as a bridge, I'm not sure how much contingency we're going to need
Well,
before
one
we can
simple way
hire
to do it
have a
is just
special
divide
meeting.
it, divide it in four.
Bernrat, pass me one more time.
25,000.
Contingent?
24%, 25% of the year's budget.
Of the 100,000.
Right. So effectively, we would be adopting last year's expenditures plus 25,000 contingency as part of the base in case that would
To be
happen.
safe.
That's not 25%. You're saying 25,000.
25,000, one
Of
fourth.
With 100,000,
Of
so it's
100,000.
25%.
That'd be fine. So instead of 550, we'd be looking at 575.
Well, last year's total expense was 564, so 564, 562 plus
Round up to
25.
600 and call it great.
Okay.
And with county council, we're okay with that, I just went, we're okay with, okay. He says yes.
So, Madam Chairman, may I
Yes.
restate my motion?
Restate your motion.
I move that we adopt a $600,000 annual budget to be distributed in the manner that last year's budget was spent.
Okay.
Until the special meeting or?
And that we have a special meeting.
And that we hold a special meeting, a date to be determined, to study the budget as a whole.
The budget.
Budget.
Thank you. We
I'd
got to
like-
have a little humor here.
Well, I have to be careful that I don't get some barnyard humor mixed into my discussion here.
Okay. Okay, is there a second? Will the second accept that?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there further discussion? All in favor? I'm not going to ask for hands this time. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition?
I'm concerned, I'd rather, I'm gonna,
You're going to oppose?
yeah.
I thought I heard a voice over there. You were just objecting. Okay. So we have, you have voted nay. Is that correct? Just to make it clear. Okay. So we have a motion that carries 3-1 with Mr. Zaragoza objecting. Okay, now.
And I just want to share with you because
Okay.
I have really not been involved to the degree that the rest of the folks have been here, so I just, abstain from that.
And we will look forward to that special, being contacted about the special meeting.
We'll try and arrange that, or at least get the availability as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Next item is number 7, proposed resolution number 2009-4, agreement regarding Strickland Mutual Water Company's appeal for groundwater charges.
Madam Chair, board members, members of the audience, Gerhard Hubner, Watershed Protection District, and agency staff. I'll be presenting item number 7. This is an agreement regarding the Strickland Mutual Water Company's appeal of groundwater extraction charges. A little bit of background. On May of this year, agency staff sent Strickland Mutual Water Company a request for payment of $28,627.89 for outstanding principal, penalties, and interest owed the agency for groundwater extracted. In May 30th of 2009, Strickland sent us a response letter / appeal requesting relief from the GMA imposed penalties and fees as calculated in our letter. Strickland Mutual Water Company is a nonprofit 501c3. A little bit of background on the company. It's services a low-income neighborhood, and its water delivery infrastructure is in need of extensive repairs. At least this is what Strickland has represented to us. They've also told us that its board members are not professional water managers, and furthermore, that it was managed by a system operator who for more than 30 years did not attend to the GMA requirements, thus the lack of payment. In our May 30th, 2009 letter, Strickland proposed 2 compliance projects to install water meters in the Strickland Acre tract and conduct initial sonic leak detection evaluations on its water system. Also, Strickland has taken recent actions to replace the previous system operator identified in the previous slide, reassigned board member tasks, and has shown a willingness to pay off the past company debts. We met with Strickland representatives on June 30th, and we discussed their proposed solution. They are also seeking financing arrangements with County Commerce Bank and through a loan guarantee through the USDA. The loan allows them to pay the principal amount owed and also the compliance projects that they proposed. They've also indicated that the proposed timeline to complete their compliance projects is reasonable. So in conclusion, we believe this is a win-win for both the agency and Strickland Mutual Water Company. Serves both the community and the agency's interest by providing water conservation measures through the installation of the water meters and leak detection. It will resolve the appeal that's before you, and thus we prepared Resolution 2009-04 to memorialize this agreement with deadlines for completion of the required items. The resolution requires assessment of the full amount owed the agency, including the principal, penalty, and interest of $28,627. However, $25,618.05 of that penalty interest would be suspended and deemed waived if Strickland completes the following, which is pay the principal amount by, and again, this is a correction, this needs to say September 22nd, 2009, and this was agreeable to them. Provide proof of installation of the 125 water meters, submit a report a year from now, 2010, and then provide results of that water main leak detection evaluation again in a year. So our recommendation for you today is that you adopt Resolution 2009-4. The resolution is also in line with the agency's recently adopted enforcement guiding principles, including provisions for fair and firm and consistent regulation, public participation, and environmental justice. That's our recommendation. I understand, I spoke with Representative Strickland. I believe they're in the audience and will be willing to speak on the matter.
Okay, is there anybody from Strickland who'd like to speak to us? Just state your name for the record, please.
Theo Provencio, Strickland Mutual Water Company. Pretty much everything was said that needs to be said. Again, it is a win-win situation. The monies that you would be forgiving us is going back into our infrastructure to help conserve water, because at the rate we're going, the reduction that the GMA is doing, has done recently, with our allocated credits and so forth, within a few years we could easily start over pumping. So time to take care of it is now, and to take these monies and put them to good use. It would be definitely beneficial to everyone here. And that's all.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Zaragoza.
the water meters are really going to help too,
Yeah, and that's what we're
especially
finding out.
nowadays.
Some people might not like it at first, but
Yeah, but it'll help.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
okay.
I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second to approve, all in favor?
Aye.
And that's with the one change of date
Yeah.
that the payment is due on September 22nd, 09, right?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I might, just a
Yes.
quick comment. I wanted to say that I appreciate staff taking into account the special conditions of this small mutual. I think that shows a move in the right direction of not coming in heavy-handed, but, taking into account the situations of individuals.
I think it's a good compromise solution.
Thank you.
Okay, item 8, adoption of resolution for consent to representation and waiver of conflicts of interest, Agency Council, LAFCO Council.
And I will be making a brief presentation on this item. It is a recommendation that your board adopt resolution number 2009-05, consenting to county council representing and advising both this agency and LAFCO with regard to any issues that may arise out of the possible adjustment of the agency boundary. Your board may recall at last month's meeting there was an informational item which pointed out certain confusion and possible inaccuracy in the currently approved agency boundary map. I believe there was direction from the board to staff to come back later this year with a recommendation. with regard to adjustment of that agency boundary, and that possibility implicates LAFCO. I am required to disclose to your board that County Council, in addition to advising this agency, does advise LAFCO, and under the rules of professional conduct, to seek and obtain your board's written consent to that joint representation. And so that is the recommended action with Resolution 0905. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't see you getting up.
Steve Bachman, United Water. United Water is against this particular adoption of this item, and there's going to be a direct conflict with the county, we believe, the GMA and the county, when it comes to potentially moving the boundary in the Sadako area, because that's the area the county has a large well, which is the major issue that's going to be there. There's been some deal worked out between the county and the city of Ventura on use of that water. It's come up in an EIR just recently. We think that it's very hard. It puts the county council in a terrible position to have to represent potentially some deal that the county had made with it, at the same time trying to represent the GMA on the very same issue. And we think that there may be some distinct conflict there. So we don't think any kind of general waiver like this, maybe specific ones, but not a general waiver on this issue.
Okay. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this issue? Okay. Guess now I'll ask for board members' thoughts on this issue.
Madam Chairman, it seems to me that County Council's got a three-way deal here. They have the Public Works Agency who owns the property, or it's whose property. They have the LAFCO, and then they would have the GMA representation as a three-way split. And if you're going to divide somebody's loyalty, three ways is a real hard way to do it. So I don't think it's appropriate, and I don't think the GMA should be doing this.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, you know, I was a member of LAFCO for about 12 years, but LAFCO represents the 10 cities of the county, not just, you know, the county. So they represent, you know, land use and so forth for the entire 10 cities in the county. So, I mean, just wanted to clarify that. It's just not the county. You know, all 10 cities are represented, and special districts, and the public is also represented in LAFCO, just for additional information.
And
okay.
could I just to add one clarification? LAFCO did approve this, what Dr. Bachman referred to as a general waiver. I am not familiar with the specific issue or the specific approval that he referenced. But just to clarify, this would not cover if, in fact, there is a potential conflict between the county and the GMA with regard to some approval that's being granted to the city for that project. That would be a separate approval, and again, I'm not aware of what that transaction or project involves.
And I would have, I'm not aware of the transaction either. We did comment, county staff as well as GMA did comment on the EIR for the city of Ventura's well field, but that was separate.
And just one further point, if in fact that potential conflict exists, that would require a third waiver from the county that has not been raised. But if there is an issue, that would be necessary.
And would it, Madam Chair, also special counsel would have to be?
Well, let me ask this. Is there something coming up right away that we would need to approve this before September?
Not specifically. It was my understanding from the discussion at the last meeting that the board wanted to move forward with adjustment of the agency boundary.
Is this one of the things that was going to be included in the additional money in the budget that we just took out?
It's just a correction.
Well, I mean, we might have given direction at the last board meeting, but it seems to me some of those things that we've been directing aren't going to happen until we have further discussions on the budget.
Madam Chair, I think that was the intention of that special meeting, is to sort these issues out that
So-
people had with the current budget, and then
Unless there's something coming up before a special meeting or before our September meeting that we need to have this approved, maybe it would be just as good to delay this until after that discussion.
Madam Chairman, could we ask Dr. Bachman maybe to see, I don't see how there's any study needed. The boundaries in question are all determined, are they not? The issue is, does it get resolved? I don't, maybe we can ask the Pope or something.
Well, no, there
That's
haven't
LAFCO.
there haven't technical studies done that would do this, so I don't think the studies are necessary. It would be whatever the procedures would be to go through this, and of course we don't know, what kind of opposition there would be potentially here in the GMA on moving that issue, or in LAFCO as
Canada,
well.
of course, we got the city of Ventura, who has its own stake in this issue.
Yeah, well, the city of Ventura apparently is a bit conflicted on this issue too, so.
But wouldn't that special counsel, outside counsel be required as a result of that if anything did happen?
That special counsel acting on behalf of GMA?
Or the board, right? For that.
Right, they would only be advising your board. They would not be advising any of the other agencies. I also thought I'd point out one of the issues involving the adjustment of the agency boundary will be whether or not any agency other than your board has jurisdiction to make that determination. But again, as far as the actual project that would potentially be occurring within the agency boundary, that is not an approval that's come to your board or a request that's come to your board for approval. And so at this point, I'm not aware of any potential conflict that would exist because of that.
But Madam Chair, what we're doing here with this resolution is just waiving the conflict of interest of Ventura County Council.
With regard to LAFCO.
With LAFCO, yeah. So I don't see any problem.
Well, I think the problem comes up when if the county doesn't want to have that area included in the GMA, because it's going to create problems. The well does not have an allocation, so there's some real potential problems when that occurs. And again, I don't know what the county's stand on this is, but it seems that as soon as that comes up to LAFCO, it could be that county council gets some definite instructions about how this thing ought to go, and perhaps not in the interest of the GMA.
Steve, I had one question, clarifying. When you said United, are you saying United staff, or is United board taking this up and taking a position?
Well, we talked about it at both levels.
So it was actually on the agenda?
No, it wasn't on the agenda, no.
So the board hasn't given you specific direction as an official action.
Not as official action, but board members said to make this comment.
You didn't say that 3 of them did you?
No, I didn't.
I didn't hear that. They don't want the fines from the Attorney General. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Henry.
Henry Gromlich, Cayugas Municipal Water District. I guess I have a question for council or for the board. If the adjustment of the agency boundary as approved by LAFCO then needs to be approved by the Board of Supervisors, will an additional waiver be necessary for the Board of Supervisors vis-a-vis this issue?
It would, yes.
Okay, so that would be 4 parties that would, if it was GMA, LAFCO, County Public Works, Board of Supervisors, or would County Public Works be subsumed under Board of Supervisors?
It would. So three 3 entities.
Thank you. Just clarification for your board's consideration.
I'd like to make a motion that
Why didn't I nominate one of you guys to be vice chairman?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the resolution.
Okay, is there a second? I think your motion's going to die for lack of a second. If we do nothing,
We can do the honor, Madam Chair.
well, all we have, the whole item can die for lack of a motion. But I think we need to give a little bit of direction as to whether we want to hire outside counsel.
Madam Chairman, where my part, and I was discussing this a tiny bit with Al before we came in, but the problem I see is it would seem to me it puts him in somewhat of a difficult position. And the boundary issue, the internal boundaries between the basins is more of an internal matter. A peripheral boundary is a more serious matter, what puts some property owners in and out. And this has been sitting back on the backside of the stove for a long time. And we've danced around it a tiny bit for a while. We've got a number of people, especially along the north side of the Las Postas, that are half in, half out. A lot of area that's going to need to get discussed too. And I see significant problems here in the long run with some of this concept, not necessarily just this one incident. And it seems to me we need to look forward to the bigger issue, not just this one little issue that the county, although this issue itself has enough wrinkles in it to be potentially a problem. I just see that it is a bad thing to get started, and we're going to need to get out. I think we're going to need to get outside counsel before we're done with this project, defining how far we can move the boundaries out where we know the Fox Canyon sands are. It was a subject of a lengthy discussion this morning. How you define the boundary? Is it to the top of the hill? Is it to the side of the hill? Is it where the sand stops? Is it where we can drill water and get water? I mean, there's 1,000 things to be discussed here, and I think these are going to require outside counsel with significant water law experience, and that's not any discredit to staff counsel. I think it's a serious issue, and this is just one little piece of it. So I am not in favor of making it now, and I think that we need to look to the whole thing and get somebody online to help us with these issues as they come up now and in the future.
Okay. Mr. Borchard.
I would kind of echo some of those comments, and in addition, just say it kind of almost raises the question that in general, I think county council serving this agency at many opportunities perhaps could be trying to serve two clients, the county and GMA, and just kind of as a matter of theory or it doesn't seem to be right. You wouldn't people in a trust dispute or of some sort wouldn't have the same attorney representing both parties, and I just think as a matter of policy, it's probably something that we're going to have to look at, that we in fact may need to have our own counsel, even though I think county counsel has served us very well, and particularly in the founding days of this agency when we didn't have such weighty matters at hand. But I think as we go further and things become more and more evident that we've got issues to deal with, I do think we need to have some expertise in water law advising us and making sure our house is in order. Maybe I might forward an opposite motion that we not approve this resolution.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
A motion, a second to not approve resolution, had to have a number, 2009-05.
the recommendation, Mr. Board said, is to look at all the...
Well, no, the motion is to not approve the item. The other was comment. The other wasn't part of your motion, right? Is that correct?
True, yeah, the other was comment in front of that, and then I decided, well, why don't we try this from a different
But
angle?
the other was not part of your motion.
Correct.
Okay, very good. So the motion is simply to not approve this, this resolution. Any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
No.
And we got one no, so we have, okay, this is one of those things that you vote no and you mean yes, or you vote yes and you mean no. So we have 3 people in support of the motion, which is to not approve the resolution. And Mr. Zaragoza is voted against it. I'm laughing because every time there's a proposition on the ballot, and in order to vote yes, you have to vote no, I get really confused.
Vote no and yes.
Okay, so we are also, were you asking to finish this item up for a specific item on a future agenda to generally discuss our legal representation, or to discuss that as part of a budget study session, or I'm just trying to follow up on the comments.
I appreciate your thoroughness, and I think it's probably a little premature to have it as an agenda item. It probably needs to be vetted through SAG and through constituents, and I think that's probably going to be a lengthy discussion that maybe isn't so important to be dealt with just about at this time.
Okay, very good. Next is executive officers report, and there are items A through G under administrative reports. Are there any ones of these staff would particularly like to make an oral report on, or that any board members have questions on?
Just our standard report, some of the groups that will be meeting. For example, the SAG will be meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock. But the rest of it, rest of the items are just to show our level of participation with the various groups.
Okay.
And correspondence received.
Any questions? Motion to receive and file?
So made.
Second.
Motion and second to receive and file the administrative reports, items A through G. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay, that gets us down to adjournment, and it says here the next regularly scheduled board meeting will be on Wednesday, September 23rd, but in the meantime, we look forward to a special meeting. Meeting adjourned.